Afternoon. My name is Ken Sheehan. I am the Director of Operations here at Smart 247 and delighted to be joined by my colleague Gavan Egan. And we're here today to talk about NIS2, what it means, where we are at the moment, and then what it means particularly then for CISOs as they try and tackle this new regulation. So, Gavin, could you introduce yourself, please?
Hey, thanks, Ken, and great to be here today. And good afternoon, everybody. So, Gavan Egan is my name. I lead the commercial business here at SmartTech 247 as Director of Sales and Marketing. This area is of particular passion to me. My background is in the utility and CNI sector, and obviously NIS2 is critical to that. I've got over 25 years now in the cybersecurity space. So delighted to get the opportunity to talk about NIS2 today. So back over to you, Ken.
Great, thanks, Gavin. So, how did we get here in NIS2? It's been a long road to the implementation of the regulation, and we're not quite there yet in Ireland yet. But how did we get here, and why is the European Union regulating this area so much? I suppose if we rewind a few years ago and look at some of the major cyber events that have affected both Europe and I suppose specifically Ireland, and in 2021 the HSE cyber attack did really affect the ability of the state to deliver healthcare for a period. Europe saw what a systemic threat cyber events could be to both economy and societies of its countries. So after the events of the HC cyber attack and other events across Europe, the European Union started to building up resilience through introducing further regulation. Not just NIS2, which focusing on critical and important sectors, but other areas you can probably familiar with, like the EU AI Act and other specific areas like DORA for financial institutions and ESA-IS for airlines and air freight organizations. So across a whole raft of areas, the European Union is regulating, and from our perspective, what they're trying to do is build up the resilience of European organizations. So it reduces the risk of a seismic economic toll on as a result of a single cyber event. So how bad can it be? And from our perspective, if you look at what is certainly the worst or the most impactful cyber event from 2025. We think it was the cyber attack on JLR, Jaguar Land Rover in the United Kingdom. So from that one cyber attack, it had not only effect on on JLR, there are hundreds of suppliers, the thousands of people that work for those suppliers, but it actually had an effect on the British economy itself. So the growth rate for Q3 in GDP terms for the UK economy was actually down by 0.03% as a result of this single attack. So what we can see is that there is the potential of a seismic impact as a result of one-off cyber attacks. So then the European Union has stepped in with regulations like NIS2 in order to mitigate those threats. So that's how we got here. And so I'll hand over back over to Gavin and listen. Just Gavin, do you have any insights on what we're actually seeing in the market at the moment and how organizations are what they're worried about in this area?
Yeah, Ken, absolutely. We're seeing lots of activity in the market. So when I think about the customers and the community in which we operate, and in the entities now that compromise, they are composed of kind of essential and important entities under NIS2. We're seeing a lot of activity from an OT perspective, and we're also seeing a lot of activity around identity management, which is quite interesting. And maybe I'll talk about those two in sequence. So typically for essential and important entities, their IT challenge from a cybersecurity perspective is well understood. Now, just to be clear, I'm not saying it's sorted out, but they know what they know, and oftentimes they know what they don't know as well, right? So they understand the level of the task ahead of them from an NIS2 perspective. I think where we're seeing a real focus and a real sense of urgency is really around the OT environment and what they need to do for an OT environment. We're seeing companies who need to understand, first of all, like, what is the security posture of an OT environment? As most of our audience will know, OT environments are typically segregated, didn't come under the cybersecurity controls of a CISO or IT, normally run by the all the automation teams and a lot of companies that we're dealing with. So it's so integration of the IT and OT is new and is different. So what we're seeing with a lot of the customers and community that we're talking to is first of all to understand the risk posture and the cybersecurity posture of their OT environment, and we're getting involved in a lot of things like penetration testing and scanning and all that kind of stuff to help customers from that perspective. And I think that is well underway in a lot of customers, so which is fantastic. But actually, we're seeing two areas of particular challenge. Then in relation to the OT environment, I think the first thing is we're seeing the integration of the IT and OT. Okay, so where are your touch points? Where are they actually connected? And in particular, the governance around how you connect and disconnect, if you need to, your IT and OT environments. So how do you connect them? But in the case of an incident or a major incident response, how do you treat those environments? That's quite an interesting nuance that I think a lot of companies are dealing with at the moment, and we're delighted to be able to help in that regard. The other area is actually the integration of your OT environment with your supplier environments, right? And this is actually quite interesting, and one I've kind of personal kind of scars on this one from history. So the I think customers are thinking of, okay, so I have my controls in place, my suppliers have their controls in place. Do those controls complement each other or not? Is there gaps in that, and really understanding that? And I think the second area is from a contractual perspective and from an SLA and service perspective, are we lined up with our suppliers in the event of an incident response? So just let me give you an example of that. This is a good few years ago. We were running a large incident with a major critical national infrastructure supplier, but who, by the way, was not Irish, and we required the logs from one of their suppliers to actually help us contain the incident and start remediation efforts. And the supplier politely refused, right? And so, of course, immediately you go to the contracts and say, hang on, I think you're obliged to do this. And say, actually, no, we're not. It's not in the contract, so we're not obliged to do it. And eventually we got the logs 3 or 4 months later, and they were helpful at that stage, but not as helpful as they would have been at the time, right? Now, so in the wash-up with the supplier was very interesting. They came and said, listen, we can't do it because those logs are from a shared log source, like from a shared service to be divided. It would take us a huge amount of effort to actually segregate the logs, separate your logs, and get them into. So it's just not practical for us to do it. It's not that we didn't want to help. So I think it's lesson learned there, but it's very interesting. And a lot of customers are talking to, do they have the service frameworks in place? Do they have the contractual frameworks in place to really deal with incident response from an OT perspective? That's one big area. The other area that we're seeing a lot of interest in is actually identity management. Now, before everyone jumps on, identity and access management is not actually named in NIS2, right? So it's not actually specifically called out, but there's lots of parts of NIS2 that you can identify it with. So why is this important? So I think we're definitely seeing that identity is now the cold face from a cybersecurity perspective. Like, it is where all the action happens. We're seeing it from an investment perspective. A lot of our big technology partners, they're investing from an identity, from a UEBA perspective, from a user behavior analysis perspective. We're seeing some of the biggest breaches that we've seen. So the Snowflake Salesforce attacks, that was credential theft and auth token abuse. Shiny Hunters in UNC 6395 were responsible there. We're seeing the Marks and Spencers and co-ops attacks, social engineering again, Scattered Spider again was the one there. So there's a lot happening in this area. So we're seeing a lot of our customers actually mapping NIS2 to what they need to do from an identity perspective. So explicitly, access control in NIS2 is really, really critical. But then you can look at things like the risk management policy sections around hygiene and supply chain security, and you can map things around like your obligations from a strong authentication, multi-factor authentication, phishing, training, all that kind of stuff into that. So those are two things that we're seeing in the market, Ken, today. The OT, what's happening there, especially integration points with different environments, supplier and IT environments, and then identity, which I think that's great, because I mean, as an old mentor of mine used to say, never waste a good crisis, right? And a lot of CISOs listening to this will understand that. And smart tech, we also absolutely believe, use things like NIS2, EUA Act, DORA, etc., as you talked about, Ken, to improve your risk management, right? This is the opportunity, not just compliance. So, Ken, maybe from your experience, what are you seeing that CISOs should be focused on today in the short term from an NIS2 perspective?
Thanks, Kevin. From a CISO's perspective, there's a number of kind of key questions that they have to be asking themselves at this stage. So number one is that where it is enforced at the moment and where it's not enforced at the moment. So it's not enforced in Ireland at the moment. It hasn't been transcribed into Irish law yet, but there are certainly other countries, particularly Germany. It's absolutely has been transcribed into German law. So over the next few months, we expect some challenges for some organisations because they're likely that they have presence in different countries across the European Union, and how they comply with this might be different in different countries, because so there might be some challenges around this. The other thing then, I suppose, is just to focus in exactly what documentation that the National Cybersecurity Centre in Ireland have provided. And to be fair to them, they have been ramping up to this over the last few years and have provided a number of very useful guides and documentation on their website. I suppose the one in particular that we thought was quite helpful was the NIS2 Risk Management Measures Guidance. This came out in draft format in June of last year. We're not, I don't think they're expecting too many changes once it's transcribed into Irish law. So that'll certainly give you a really good idea of the areas that you should be focusing in on as a CISO. Just the other few things then to kind of where companies should really have a good idea of where they're at now, and is just really have a really strong idea that are they in scope for NIS2? Are they an important entity, or are they an essential entity? So by and large, the rules remain the same if you're an important or an essential entity, but the way that you're audited and governed changes quite significantly. If you're an essential entity with the far more proactive governance and oversight being put in place by the state, whereas from our perspective anyway, it appears that if you're an important entity, that it is more of a reactive style governance and oversight from the state. Getting into the nitty-gritty then of what we would advise people to, or security professionals to focus in on at the start: supply chain management. This is a really complex area, and it can feel at times that it's just a never-ending list of Excel documents that people are filling out, chasing up people emails, and lots of activity. And at times it can be hard to see, is there any kind of useful benefit from all of this activity? We think there is, and certainly from a regulatory point of view, you absolutely do have to do this if you're in scope for NIS2. So certainly an initial, if you've never considered this before, the initial focus we think should be on supplier chain management, as you've touched off of some of the spectacular third-party breaches that occurred last year, and there's been some really significant ones this year that we're probably all reading about this morning as well in the newspaper. A lot of consumers affected, but how you manage your third parties is good, not only from a regulatory point of view, but also then kind of like to improve your security posture. The last thing then is just where organizations really have to kind of focus in on, and it doesn't really matter if you are already abiding by other rules, such as, if your organization is ISO 27001 certified. Just have a think about, or is the way that you notify actually documented anywhere, and have you practiced it? And in the case of an incident, do you have a really good idea of who exactly you have to notify? Because obviously different sectors have different organizations that they will have to notify. So in particular, kind of just have a think about, the timelines. It's the initial, and I think some people are referring to it as a hands-up warning that, something has happened. That has to go within 24 hours, initial report within 72 hours, and then the full report then within a month. And a month sounds like an awful long time, but if you're trying to pull together an awful lot of different information after a potential cyber breach, that time can go by really, really quickly. So that's an overview of kind of the areas that we think that organizations should be focusing in on initially. So Gavin, back over to you, and just from your perspective, what are SmartTech 247 doing to help organizations get ready for this?
Yeah, thanks, Ken. When I think about this, I think I look at it probably in two ways. They're definitely complementary, and they're all part of the same initiative. So we're first of all, I think we're helping customers understand, their journey to NIS2, right? So as you talked about the RMM, the risk management measures, alignment to cyber fundamentals is also critical. So a lot of times we're doing, as I talked about earlier on, we're kind of first of all helping customers understand do they have controls in place, what controls they have in place, are they effective, and that's through the whole testing regime that we do with them. The other thing we're doing is we're doing a lot of baseline assessments. So we'll do baseline assessments against cyber fundamentals, help customers understand the standards they have in place, the processes they have in place, how mature they are, how well, as to your point, Ken, right, how well they're documented, all that kind of stuff, and deliver training then against that to help customers understand first of all what they need to do, and then map out the journey for them in terms of getting to NIS2 compliance. And as you pointed out earlier on, I think there's in the EU today, I think there's 8 countries that have adopted the NIS2 legislation into law, right? And they've all done in slightly different ways and slightly different nuances. In some countries, you might be an important entity. In other countries, you might not be an important entity. So one of the things we're working on with a lot of customers who are present in multiple EU countries, we're helping them understand how to manage that. What we're definitely encouraging there is to really do your governance and frameworks, do that centrally, and then push out compliance locally, and obviously aware and be sympathetic to the local nuances from a compliance perspective. That's going to be an interesting journey over the next year or so, as the more and more EU countries adopt this legislation, and we see really how it's going to happen from that perspective. The other area is actually stakeholder management, and the key way and the most effective way that we're seeing our community get their stakeholders on board is really through doing things like incident response exercises, tabletop exercises, where we'll go in and taking both IT and OT environments, supply chain into account. That's a critical one, as you say, Ken, and running those kind of tabletop exercises with senior IT management, but also with the executive leadership and the board, to really help them understand, the maturity of where they are today, make sure everyone's aware of what to do, when to do it, all that kind of stuff, but also to paint a picture of what they need to take on in terms of obligations from an NIS2 perspective, and indeed the other kind of type of legislative requirements that have recently come on us, right? So kind of that's, in summary, that's really kind of that's what we're doing, right? So testing so people understand where they are, doing this, the baseline assessments, mapping out the journey and the process, but also helping then really communicating at a senior stakeholder and board level so people understand the journey that they're on. So maybe hand it back to you, Ken, to wrap. Thank you.
Perfect. And this is fantastic. Bang on the 20 minutes. So to wrap up, just 2 things I want to highlight. One is the just before Christmas, SmartTech released our annual threat landscape report, and that kind of gets into an awful lot of the detail of kind of the threats that we're seeing, how that relates to some of the regulations that are being implemented in 2026, and then what we expect to see then during 2026. Of course, I would say this, but I think it's a really good read. The final thing then is just NIS2 is important, and this will be just one of the topics that we'll be discussing during our Zero Day conference. This year it's taking place on April the 29th. So lots of fantastic speakers signed up so far, and we'll be excited to announce more over the coming days. But I suppose particularly we're delighted to once again welcome speakers from the Irish National Cybersecurity Centre, who always bring a great insight into both these and other issues. So that's it. Thanks everybody for joining, and looking forward to seeing you at Zero Day Con.